Mood Tracker series continuing tonight. The Mood Tracker is just a temperature of the fan base. How you feeling? Now, we have certain protocol around here, and it stands to reason we had to wait. We had to hit the pause button on doing the Notre Dame Mood Tracker because they've had coaching turnover up there, but not quite like they've had in other places. It turns out Notre Dame already had their head coaching candidate right there in-house, promoting from within. What a novel concept. Maybe more programs, dare I say, will be trying this in the not-too-distant future. Notre Dame folks are jacked, but that's not the mood I'm going to go with. I was over on IrishIllustrated.com earlier today, which is our fine Notre Dame site, and I put it to, not a vote, but I put it to the board there, and I said, fill in the blank. My current mood towards Notre Dame football is what? And I absorbed all the answers there, because they're all excited. I mean, it's not that they think this is a slam dunk, but they're all excited. Which leads me to share with you what the mood at Notre Dame is. The mood tracker at Notre Dame right now is on the top rope. If you've ever watched someone go to the top rope, they understand the risk. It's called a high-risk maneuver for a reason. You could crash and burn entirely. Kurt Angle made an entire career of doing moonsaults off the top rope that never landed. He didn't trust that he could land it, so the only time he did it was just show, look, I can do a backflip. Marcus Freeman has the entire Notre Dame fan base ready to ascend to the top rope. They normally used ground tactics. You know, they were mat wrestlers, if you will, under Brian Kelly. Well, those folks are up on the top rope right now. It's like watching a 300-pounder up there, and you said, you don't normally go to the top rope. Well, they are now. Something's changed. A little bit of an attitude has changed about the Notre Dame fan base, and it's a common theme. That's why I don't even really feel all that reserved about putting it this way. They seem to a vast majority, feel this way. It's not that they aren't aware there is a risk in going to the top rope, just like there's a risk in elevating a guy to the head coaching position that hasn't even been a defensive coordinator for all that too terribly long and has never been a head coach. Yeah, there's risk in that. They're willing to accept it because these folks think that the reward with Marcus Freeman being the head coach there could be higher than what they achieved under Brian Kelly. You know my thoughts about Brian Kelly. I've been supremely high on him. I thought even though they've made the playoff a couple of times, I thought he was underrated as a head coach there because I think people incorrectly interpreted Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. But that's in the past now. So now you got Marcus Freeman there, and the Notre Dame fan base, it's not that they didn't appreciate Brian Kelly, it's quite the opposite. But there is I would say, consensus around Notre Dame circles that however high they were going to fly under Brian Kelly, they had reached the summit. I mean, they had bent their head up against the ceiling of whatever Irish football was going to be under Brian Kelly. Now, they're removing the safety net because there was a safety net under the program with Brian Kelly. You were never going to be terrible for long. You were never even going to be average for long. You were going to float in the above average to really good range. Now they want to take the chance, take the risk that's necessary to find out if they can ever be elite. Can they pop a season on someone where they don't have to go into a playoff and say, yeah, but I mean, unless this, and this happens, we can't beat Clemson. Unless this, and this happens, we can't beat Alabama. They're too talented. They see Marcus Freeman, just like Mel Tucker at Michigan State, quite frankly, and they see a guy that potentially can break the recruiting mold of Notre Dame football. And very limited sample size, but he kind of just did it already, and they expect that to continue. But that's not the only reason. There's another reason why they're willing to accept the risk. See, Notre Dame fans look around, they know there's risk in hiring a guy or elevating a guy rather that's never been a head coach, but they're willing to accept the risk reward because of another key reason. And I can't really make sense of this. You just get it if you're around Notre Dame. There's a certain set of characteristics that all Irish folks know it takes to embrace Notre Dame. It's not for everyone, and everyone's not cut out for Notre Dame, whether it be as a player, sometimes as a fan, but especially as a head coach. It's just a certain set of something you have to have. And you package all that up, and it's called, well, a group of characteristics. Brian Kelly had enough of them, but they think Marcus Freeman's got all of them. And Marcus Freeman's a guy with options. And for that matter, that coaching staff he put together there, those are guys with options. And they chose Notre Dame. That's no small thing. You live in Reno, Nevada. You've never been east of the Rockies, and certainly you've never visited campus there. You've never taken in a game in South Bend. You don't know anyone who went to Notre Dame. It may not make a lot of sense to you. But you probably do have something special in your life. You probably do have something that you hold dear in your life, and you get what it's about. Even if you can't articulate it, you get what is special about that thing in your life and what separates it. And you know, a lot of people wouldn't get it. and you can only let a very few select people in on it because only a very few select people will appreciate it. Well, that thing for these folks is Notre Dame football and Notre Dame in general, to be clear. And Marcus Freeman gets it, and he got it, and he chose Notre Dame. That means a lot to them. Means a whole lot. Means more than probably anyone, including me, outside of that Notre Dame circle can know. But I do get it in theory, at least. And so he chose Notre Dame, and boy, they've chosen him. Again, we got a situation here in South Bend, Indiana, in Norman, Oklahoma. Both of these really kind of resemble that whole thing that Sam Pittman's been able to create at Arkansas. It's the difference in looking at your head coach and saying him and looking at your head coach and saying we, us. There's a difference. They won with Brian Kelly. It was great. But they look at Marcus Freeman and they say some things about him they didn't say about Brian Kelly. They never really said we about Brian Kelly. It was a him situation. They understood each other. Brian Kelly understood Notre Dame. Notre Dame understood Brian Kelly. They were mutually beneficial for each other. But when they've looked at Marcus Freeman, just a different kind of gleam in the eye when you look at Marcus Freeman. But also, and this kind of resonates nationally, they promoted from within. Now, this is another program that's trying to capture what, for example, Ohio State has captured under Ryan Day. A lot of you watched this last wild coaching carousel cycle, and you saw some places where it was a new headline every day, and did they get it right? Did they not get it right? And that's not just last cycle, that's every cycle. And then you watch some places, Notre Dame's one of them, where they just promoted from within. Didn't even have to leave campus if they didn't want to. They had the guy there. It's impossible for us to know Marcus Freeman as well as the folks at Notre Dame know Marcus Freeman. There are going to be many things written about this guy early on, unfairly so, because it is way too early to judge him. In year one, I think it's always too early to judge a head coach, but especially Marcus Freeman, it's going to be too early to judge him, but that won't stop people from doing it. But I will say this. I trust my eye, I trust my judgment, I trust my opinion, but there are some things where I will defer, and on this culture fit and this acceptance and this we versus him deal, I defer to the fan base because they're always the first to know. The folks closest to the program sometimes can be myopic on certain things, but on this sort of thing, the fan base is the first to know. So you hear Notre Dame fans talking with a certain reverence towards a guy who's never coached a game there. Well, it can't be because of his track record. It can't be because of his win-loss record. So there's something intangible in nature. I can't quantify it now, and I can't tell you how many wins that's worth or how many additional 4- and 5-star kids that's worth per cycle. I can just tell you it matters to some degree, whether great or small, it matters. They know they've got it, or they strongly believe they've got it. And so that is why the mood tracker at Notre Dame right now is on the top rope. You could crash and burn, or you could land it, pin them for the 1, 2, 3, and then have some hardware in your trophy case that you haven't seen in quite a while in South Bend, Indiana.